It's strange how easily pain becomes routine. Months passed, yet I still woke up beside Imran every morning, exchanged the same words, played the same roles. The world saw a normal couple, but what they couldn't see was the quiet fracture underneath. We didn't argue anymore, that part of us had burned out. What remained was civility, empty, careful, and cold. He still asked how my day was, and I still answered, both of us pretending those words meant something. There was no rage, no tenderness, just two people surviving the ghost of a marriage. Sometimes, in those quiet mornings, I'd wonder what would have happened if he hadn't said those words that night. Maybe I would have kept believing we were fine, that silence was normal, that love didn't need to be spoken to survive. But he'd wanted truth more than peace, and truth, once spoken, doesn't vanish. It lingers, reshaping everything around it. He got the honesty he wished for, but it took everything else with it. Ryan had disappeared from my life completely. I deleted his number, blocked his messages, erased every trace of him. It wasn't anger, it was survival. I couldn't carry his presence while trying to fix what was left at home. Not that there was much to fix. Imran had forgiven nothing, but he also never punished me. His silence was punishment enough. He became a stranger who spoke my language but didn't share my life. Sometimes he'd stand by the window at night, lost in thought, and I'd see the faint reflection of the man I once loved, the man who used to talk about dreams, not experiments. But that man was gone. I started noticing the small ways he distanced himself. The way he'd plan trips alone, attend dinners without mentioning them, forget anniversaries that once mattered. He wasn't cruel, he was indifferent. And that hurt more than anger ever could. Anger means there's still fire left. Indifference means ashes. I tried to reach him once, told him I wanted to start over, to forget everything. He just looked at me with quiet exhaustion and said, "You can't forget what you chose." There was no hate in his tone, only truth. And I couldn't argue with truth, not anymore. Nights became the hardest. Lying beside him, I'd stare into the dark, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, wondering if he still thought of that night, of what I did, of the man whose name I'd never say again. Sometimes I'd wish he would ask, scream, accuse, anything to break the stillness. But he never did. His restraint was its own kind of cruelty. It made me realize he no longer needed to understand. He'd already accepted that we weren't the same, that we never would be. I began to withdraw in my own way. My silence became a mirror of his. I stopped waiting for forgiveness and started living with absence. I filled my days with work, distractions, meaningless tasks that gave the illusion of purpose. The only thing left between us was the shared understanding that love, once fractured by choice, never returns whole. It becomes something else, something polite, quiet, and impossible to repair. One evening, we were sitting together after dinner when he finally spoke about it, not in anger, but in reflection. He said, "Do you know why I asked you that question? I wanted to know if honesty could survive desire." I looked at him and said softly, "And did you get your answer?" He nodded. "Yes. It can't." He said it like a conclusion, not an accusation. Then he got up, walked away, and left me with those words echoing in the air. That was the last real conversation we ever had about it. Time dulled the pain but never erased it. We learned to exist beside the truth, to carry it like a scar we both pretended not to see. Friends still admired how composed we seemed, how steady, how perfect. They didn't know that every smile was rehearsed, every gesture measured. We had built a fragile peace, not out of love but out of exhaustion. It was easier to stay together than to face what being apart would expose. Sometimes, I still catch him watching me, but it's not with love or anger, it's with quiet remembrance, as if he's looking at someone who once meant everything but no longer does. I know that look because I see it in myself too. We became two versions of the same loss, living proof that some wishes should never be spoken aloud. That I don't blame him anymore. I understand now that what he asked for wasn't betrayal, it was clarity. He wanted to know what would happen if truth had no boundaries. He got his answer, and I got mine. Truth can destroy faster than lies ever could, because lies at least protect the illusion that love is still alive. Truth tears that illusion apart, leaving nothing to hold on to. Now, when I think of him, I don't feel hatred or regret. Just acceptance. We both made choices we can't undo. His wish, my yes, our silence, it all became one story that can never be rewritten. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I whisper into the dark, we did it. We told the truth. And look where it brought us. My husband once said he wanted honesty more than anything. What he didn't realize was that honesty is rarely gentle. It doesn't heal, it exposes. And once it does, there's no going back. So we live now, side by side, polite strangers bound by a secret wish that neither of us truly wanted to come true. The truth set us free, but it also left us with nothing to hold on to except the memory of what it destroyed. Days passed, but the silence between us grew heavier. Imran no longer teased me about his strange question, but it lived between every word we didn't say. He was there, present, polite, predictable, but emotionally miles away. Sometimes I caught him watching me as if searching for something, and when our eyes met, he'd just look away. I told myself it was work stress, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something had shifted since that night. His wish had planted a thought neither of us could unthink. Then came the afternoon I met Ryan again. It wasn't planned. He showed up at the same cafe I went to after work, and when he spotted me, his smile felt like sunlight breaking through a cloud I didn't know I'd been living under. We talked again, small things at first, harmless things. He asked about my writing, about Imran, about life. He had a calm way of listening, of making silence feel safe. When I left, I told myself it was nothing. Just conversation. But the warmth stayed with me all evening. Imran noticed. He noticed everything. He looked at me differently that night, his tone sharp but quiet. "You've been smiling a lot lately," he said, not as a compliment, more as an observation. I asked what he meant, but he just shrugged. "I'm glad you're happy." The words sounded kind, but they carried something cold. It wasn't approval, it was detachment. Like he'd already stepped outside of the marriage and was watching me from a distance. The next few weeks blurred into a rhythm of confusion. Imran became unpredictable, sometimes attentive, sometimes distant, sometimes almost cruel in how calm he seemed. I couldn't read him anymore. I tried to bring up that night, to ask what he really meant when he said those things, but he always brushed it off. "It was just a thought experiment," he'd say. "You think too much." But the damage was already done. I started thinking all the time about what honesty really meant, about what he was trying to prove. Ryan kept appearing in small ways, texting about something he saw that reminded him of our talk, inviting me to a charity event, asking if I'd had lunch. I tried to resist, but each exchange felt like a small rescue from the emptiness at home. His words filled spaces Imran had left hollow. I told myself it was friendship, that I needed someone to talk to, that I wasn't doing anything wrong. But every time I heard my phone buzz, my heart beat faster than it should have. One night, I told Imran I'd run into Ryan again. He didn't flinch. He just looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, "If you ever do something, just don't lie to me about it." I froze. There was no accusation in his voice, just quiet certainty. Like he was setting a rule for a game I hadn't agreed to play. I asked him what that meant, but he didn't answer. He kissed my forehead, wished me good night, and turned away. After that, I couldn't sleep. His words kept echoing, twisting, turning. Was he giving me permission, or daring me to betray him? Was he so sure I wouldn't, or did he secretly want me to? I wanted to believe it was a test, but part of me feared it wasn't. Part of me feared he meant every word. The following week, Ryan and I met again. It happened naturally. He offered to drop me home after a meeting that ran late. The car ride was quiet, filled with unsaid things. When he parked outside my building, he looked at me with concern. "You look like you're carrying too much," he said softly. I didn't respond. He didn't push. But when I turned to leave, he touched my hand, brief, uncertain, gentle. It should have meant nothing, but it felt like everything I'd been starved of. I pulled away, whispered a goodbye, and walked inside trembling. That night, I stared at Imran while he slept. His breathing was calm, steady, peaceful. For a moment, I hated him for how easily he slept, for how effortlessly he'd placed this storm inside me and then walked away from it. I wanted to shake him, to ask him if this was what he wanted, to turn me into someone who questioned her own reflection. Instead, I whispered the question he once asked me: "If you ever wanted someone else, would you tell me?" He didn't answer. Of course, days turned into a blur of messages, glances, guilt. Ryan never crossed a line, not until the night the rain wouldn't stop. I'd stayed late at work, the roads were flooding, and he offered to drop me home again. The drive was quiet. The world outside was blurred with rain, and everything felt suspended in that moment. When the car stopped, I didn't move. He looked at me, and I looked back. There was no plan, no logic, just exhaustion, warmth, and the ache of being seen. What happened next wasn't loud or wild. It was quiet, almost sad. A moment that felt both wrong and inevitable. When it was over, the guilt didn't come instantly. It arrived later, slowly, like fog. I sat there afterward, unable to speak. Ryan said my name once, softly, as if afraid to break the air. I didn't answer. I just left. When I got home, Imran's car was in the driveway. He was inside, pretending to sleep on the couch. I knew he'd been waiting. I didn't know if he suspected anything, but I couldn't meet his eyes. I went straight to bed, lay there in the dark, and whispered into the silence, "I did what you wished." The words hurt more than the act itself. By morning, everything looked normal again. Breakfast, routine, work, nothing had changed, except everything had. I carried on, mechanical and numb, waiting for something: guilt, confession, forgiveness, but none came. Imran didn't ask, and I didn't tell. Maybe that was his wish all along, to see how far I would go, and how quietly I could live with it.
The morning after should have been filled with warmth, with laughter echoing from relatives still lingering in the house, with me holding on to the glow of being newly married. Instead, I carried the heaviness of a secret I had no one to share with. Every glance I gave Ayan felt strained, every smile forced. He moved around effortlessly, greeting family members, playing the role of a husband as though nothing weighed on him. That perfect mask of his both fascinated and terrified me, how easily he could bury truths beneath his charm. That I noticed Saad that morning, standing off to the side, his eyes resting on me with a concern he didn't voice. He was Ayan's cousin, close like a brother, someone who had always been kind without stepping too close. But his silence had a shape to it, the kind of silence that carries knowledge it cannot share. Later, when I found a moment alone, he approached me carefully, like someone debating whether to pull a bandage off a wound. His words came hesitant, but they landed like blows. He told me there were things I didn't know about Ayan, things that would hurt, but things I deserved to hear. At first, I wanted to run from the conversation. The last thing I wanted was another fracture in the illusion I was already struggling to hold together. But Saad's tone carried no malice, only a reluctant honesty. He told me that even while Ayan had been preparing to marry me, he hadn't let go of another woman. The relationship hadn't ended when it should have. It bled into our engagement, kept alive in secret meetings, hidden conversations, late-night calls that family never noticed. My chest constricted as the words sank in. Part of me clung to the possibility that Saad was mistaken, but deep inside, I knew he wasn't. His eyes didn't lie, his voice didn't waver. I asked if it was Sarah, my mind desperate to fit the pieces into one betrayal instead of two, but his silence told me otherwise. This wasn't Sarah, it was someone else. A woman I didn't know, someone outside the walls of my world, yet someone who had been close enough to occupy the place I thought was mine alone. That I felt the ground slipping beneath me. First Sarah, now this shadowy figure I couldn't even name. The betrayal spread wider, growing roots into places I couldn't reach. I tried to steady my breathing, to keep myself from unraveling in front of Saad, but inside I was collapsing. He didn't say more, only muttered that he had kept quiet to protect the family, to avoid scandal. But watching me now, he could no longer carry it in silence. Then he left me with the weight of his confession, leaving me to drown in questions with no answers. That night, I searched. While Ayan stepped into the shower, I looked through his belongings with trembling hands, not sure if I wanted proof or reassurance. What I found was worse than I expected: another phone, tucked away in the drawer beneath neatly folded clothes. A phone I had never seen before. The messages were there, threads of conversations with a name saved only as an initial. Words of affection, late-night promises, talk of missed moments and secret meetings. Some messages were weeks old, others from just days before the wedding. The kind of intimacy that shouldn't exist outside the vows we were meant to share. My body shook as I put it back exactly as I found it, every nerve in me screaming. The walls around me seemed to close in, the room colder than it had been a moment before. When Ayan emerged, smiling, casual, wrapping his arms around me like nothing had shifted, I almost screamed. How could he look at me with such ease while carrying such deceit? His touch burned with questions I couldn't ask, his smile carved wounds I couldn't reveal. I tried subtle confrontations. I asked about loyalty, about honesty, speaking in hypotheticals, hoping he would flinch, hoping he would break the act. But he didn't. His answers were smooth, measured, almost rehearsed. His denial of any wrongdoing was wrapped in laughter, as though my questions were naive. He kissed my forehead and told me to stop worrying, that love was enough. And yet, the more he spoke, the less I believed. Every moment with him now carried a dual edge. His gestures of affection no longer comforted me, they mocked me. The promises he had made at the altar, so grand and public, now felt hollow. My heart replayed Saad's confession, the secret phone, the messages from a woman I couldn't even picture. What was I to Ayan, a partner, or simply a mask he wore to please his family while his heart wandered elsewhere? I lay awake again that night, my body stiff beside his, unable to surrender to rest. I thought of how marriage was meant to be built on trust, on truth, and how mine was already drowning in lies. The past with Sarah was a wound, but this ongoing deception was a disease spreading into the very core of what we were supposed to be. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized the distance between us wasn't accidental, it was deliberate. Ayan was hiding behind walls he had built long before me, and I was just beginning to see how high they really were. By the time dawn broke, my mind was filled with a chilling certainty. Love wasn't the foundation of this marriage. Secrets were. And I knew, with a sinking heart, that this was only the beginning of what I was about to uncover. This is section 2, almost equals 770 words. Shall I continue with section 3, 760 words, to complete the story arc with the final shocking secret?
It started on an ordinary night that didn't feel ordinary at all. I remember the sound of the clock, the faint hum of the air conditioner, and the silence that had slowly become the language of my marriage. 8 years with Imran had given me everything I thought I wanted: security, comfort, a home that looked happy from the outside. But what it hadn't given me for a long time was warmth. There was love, yes, but it had lost its pulse somewhere between late meetings and polite goodnights. I kept telling myself it was normal, that every marriage settles into calm after the storm of passion. But deep down, I knew what I missed: the man who used to listen, touch my hand just because, and look at me like I was the only one in the room. That night, we sat across from each other at the dining table, a bottle of wine between us that neither of us really wanted. Imran had been quiet all evening, scrolling through his phone, his expression unreadable. Then, out of nowhere, he said it, the words that didn't make sense until they sank deep enough to leave a mark. "If you ever wanted someone else," he said, "would you tell me?" I laughed at first, thinking it was a strange joke. But he didn't smile. His eyes stayed fixed on mine, serious, almost searching. "I mean it," he continued, "if it ever happened. I'd rather know the truth than live a lie." I didn't know what to say. I asked him what kind of question that was for a husband to ask his wife. He shrugged, saying he just wondered how far honesty could go before it broke something. I told him he was being ridiculous, but the way he looked at me made me feel like he'd opened a door I wasn't ready to see behind. After that night, the conversation became a shadow between us. He didn't mention it again immediately, but it lingered. It was there in his smirk when he caught me lost in thought. It was there when he kissed me goodnight without really kissing me. A week later, we attended a dinner at one of his colleagues' homes. I wasn't in the mood to go, but I went anyway, pretending everything was fine. That's when I met Ryan. He was one of Imran's old college friends, someone I'd heard about but never met. There was something easy about him, his smile, his way of making everyone around him feel noticed. When he spoke to me, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. It wasn't about attraction then, it was about attention, about the kind of warmth that comes when someone actually listens. Imran noticed it too. He joked about it later that night while we were driving home. If I ever had to trust someone with my wife, he said, half laughing, it'd be Ryan. He said it lightly, but it didn't feel like a joke. The words hung in the air like a dare I didn't understand. I didn't respond. I just stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of yellow. When we got home, he went straight to bed, and I stood in the hallway, trying to understand why my chest felt tight. Days turned into weeks, and the unease between us grew. Imran's strange wish had become something I couldn't unhear. It wasn't that I wanted to act on it, but the thought had been planted. It lived in the back of my mind, whispering questions I didn't want answers to. What did he mean by that? Was he testing me, or giving me permission? The confusion was exhausting. One evening, I ran into Ryan at a coffee shop near my office. It wasn't planned. He greeted me like an old friend, kind and casual, asking how I'd been. We talked for a few minutes, and I realized how long it had been since I laughed without forcing it. When I told Imran about it later, he didn't react the way I expected. He just smiled faintly and said, "Good. You need people around you." I wanted to ask him what that meant, but I didn't. His tone carried something I couldn't decode, approval or indifference. I wasn't sure. That night, lying beside him, I thought about how far apart we'd drifted. He was inches away from me, but it felt like miles. I wanted to reach out, to pull him back, to remind him that I was still here, still his. But I didn't. Maybe I was afraid that even if I did, he wouldn't reach back. Instead, I stared into the dark, hearing his words again. "If you ever wanted someone else, would you tell me?" The next morning, I watched him leave for work, his tie slightly crooked, his smile tired but polite. I realized then that he had created a space between us, not out of anger or disinterest, but out of something I couldn't yet name. Maybe it was curiosity, or control, or a strange kind of test he thought love could survive. But what he didn't realize was that his wish had done something irreversible. It had made me look at myself differently, question things I used to take for granted. It wasn't about wanting someone else, it was about wondering why he'd even imagine it. Why a man who once swore I was his whole world would casually open the door for someone else to enter it. And the cruelest part was, he didn't just open it. He left it unlocked and walked away, as if daring me to see what would happen if I stepped through. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, listening to the city outside, my reflection caught in the glass. I realized something had shifted in me. Not love, not loyalty, but the certainty I once had about us. Imran's words had become a quiet storm, and I knew, whether I wanted it or not, something inside me had already started to change.